Welcome back to Modernism in world literature. Modernism marks a bold departure from the literary traditions of the 19th century, especially realism and naturalism. While these earlier movements sought to capture reality with scientific precision and objectivity, the modernists took a different path. They embraced fragmentation, subjectivity, and inner experiences. Think about authors like Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, and William Faulkner. Through their groundbreaking works, they shattered the rigid structures of narrative, challenging how we perceive time, space, and identity. But why did they do this? They were reflecting a world in crisis, a world where the old moral and social structures were crumbling, mirroring the uncertainty and upheaval of the early 20th century. At the heart of modernist literature lies the concept of fragmentation, a key technique that breaks away from traditional linear storytelling. Gone are the neatly packaged beginnings, middles, and ends. Instead, modernism presents us with a world where coherence is lost, reflecting the disorientation and existential crises brought on by the seismic shifts of the 20th century, none more so than World War I. Imagine trying to piece together a shattered mirror. That's what modernist writers did. They captured the chaotic and fractured reality of their time through fragmented narratives, as society grappled with rapid technological and social transformations. Literary historian Peter Nichols describes modernist fragmentation not just as a stylistic choice, but as a response to the disintegration of modern life. He puts it succinctly: modernist narrative disruption is not just a stylistic choice, but a reflection of the fractured worldview imposed by modernity. When we talk about fragmentation, few works are more iconic than T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land. This poem isn't just fragmented, it's a collage of voices, styles, and literary references. From Dante to Shakespeare, Eliot's work jumps between cultural and mythological allusions, creating an overwhelming sense of chaos and disintegration. It perfectly mirrors the despair and disillusionment of the post-war era. The reader is left in a world where the promise of progress and civilization has been shattered, much like the lives of those in the aftermath of World War I. Literary historian Michael Levinson calls The Waste Land a poem of radical discontinuity, where the failure of cohesion reflects the crisis of modernity. Eliot wasn't just experimenting with form. He was painting a picture of a world torn apart by lost values and moral collapse. Then there's James Joyce's Ulysses. While Eliot's fragmentation is abrupt and jagged, Joyce's is more subtle, woven through his use of stream of consciousness. In Ulysses, the story follows a single day in the life of Leopold Bloom in Dublin, but the narrative is anything but straightforward. Time flows in and out of focus, constantly interrupted by fragmented thoughts, memories, and associations, giving us a glimpse into the complex inner workings of the mind. Joyce's fragmented narrative mirrors the way we all experience modern life, full of distractions, non-linear thoughts, and fleeting impressions. Literary scholar Hugh Kenner describes Joyce's work as one that dissolves the boundaries of narrative time, creating a fluid, fragmented experience that mirrors the chaotic rhythms of modern life. But why this obsession with fragmentation? Modernist writers weren't working in isolation. They were deeply influenced by the revolutionary shifts happening in science, philosophy, and society. The 20th century saw breakthroughs that changed how we understood reality. Take Einstein's theory of relativity, which challenged our understanding of time and space. Modernist literature, in turn, began to reflect this disorientation, fragmenting time and space within their narratives to mirror a world that suddenly felt unstable and uncertain. Literary critic Stephen Kern explains that the fragmentation of time and space in modernist literature mirrors the disorientation of the modern world. Modernists like Eliot and Joyce used fragmentation to capture this new reality, one where the certainty of the past had dissolved, leaving behind an unsettling sense of instability and ambiguity. This technique also resonated with the experience of urbanization and technological change. The chaotic, fragmented environment of the modern city and the unpredictable shifts of the modern world created a sense of alienation. As Marshall Berman notes in his book, All That Is Solid Melts into Air, The modern individual often feels anchored in fragments, constantly adapting to a world in relentless flux. Have you ever wondered how differently we all perceive the world around us? This question lies at the very heart of modernist literature, where subjectivity takes center stage. Unlike the 19th century realist tradition, with its emphasis on the external objective world, modernist writers shift the focus inward. They delve into the fragmented, deeply personal ways individuals experience reality. Imagine stepping into the minds of characters, seeing the world not as it is, but as they feel it, remember it, and process it. This is what authors like Virginia Woolf, Marcel Proust, and James Joyce sought to achieve. Gone are the grand depictions of a shared, universal reality like those from Charles Dickens or Gustave Flaubert. Instead, modernists dive into the intimate, subjective experiences of their characters, blurring the lines between inner thoughts and outer actions. Through techniques like stream of consciousness, readers are invited to journey alongside characters' wandering minds, experiencing their thoughts, emotions, and memories as they unfold in real time. But why this shift? As literary critic Peter Childs puts it, modernist subjectivity responds to the crumbling certainties of the modern world, where individual perception becomes more vital than any attempt at objective representation. Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway is a perfect example of this turn toward subjectivity. The novel takes place over the course of a single day in London, following Clarissa Dalloway and a handful of other characters. But here's the twist. Woolf doesn't just show us what happens externally. She dives deep into the minds of her characters. Through her use of stream of consciousness, we slip seamlessly between their thoughts, memories, and sensory experiences, merging the past with the present in a kaleidoscopic view of reality. Rather than a neat, objective story, Woolf presents us with the fragmented, fluid nature of individual perception. We experience life just as her characters do, through their shifting inner landscapes, where the boundaries between external events and internal musings are continuously blurred. As literary historian Hermione Lee observes, Woolf creates a universe where the boundary between the external and the internal is continuously blurred, allowing readers to experience the fluid, subjective nature of reality as perceived by the individual. Woolf's characters are not just living their lives. They are remembering, reflecting, and sometimes even lost in their own thoughts, as Clarissa Dalloway's memories of her youthful friendship with Sally Seton intertwine with her present-day feelings. This intertwining of past and present gives us a glimpse into how time is experienced in the human mind, not as a linear sequence, but as a complex emotional blend of moments. Now, consider In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, a monumental exploration of subjective time. Here, time is no longer a fixed linear path. Instead, it becomes fluid, shaped by memory and emotion. Through the eyes of the protagonist, Marcel, we see how memories rise unpredictably, sometimes triggered by the simplest things, like the famous scene with the Madeleine cake. A single taste transports Marcel back to his childhood, and suddenly, the past comes flooding into the present. Isn't that how memory works for all of us? Time feels elastic, stretching and contracting based on how we recall our experiences. Roger Shattuck, a literary historian, describes In Search of Lost Time as a work that extends the boundaries of narrative time by making subjective perception the primary vehicle of temporal movement. In Proust's world, what matters is not the objective flow of time, but how individuals experience and recall it. Events aren't tied to a specific chronological order. Rather, they live on in the minds of characters, constantly reinterpreted and reshaped by memory. But where did this focus on subjectivity come from? Much of it can be traced back to the groundbreaking work of Sigmund Freud. Freud's theories about the unconscious mind, about dreams, repressed desires, and the hidden motivations behind our thoughts provided modernist writers with a whole new way of understanding human experience. Suddenly, the inner world of characters became as important as their outer actions. Freud opened up new possibilities for literature, giving writers like Woolf, Joyce, and Proust the tools to explore the complexities of human consciousness in unprecedented ways. As literary historian Peter Gay notes, the influence of Freudian theory on modernist literature cannot be overstated, as it opened up the human psyche as a new frontier of narrative exploration. Freud showed that our actions aren't always driven by rational thought, but by unconscious impulses and hidden emotions. This idea fascinated modernist writers, who used it to shape narratives that focused on the subjective, often irrational aspects of human experience. Freud's impact extended to how modernists approached time and memory. In earlier literature, time was often depicted as logical and linear, but Freud's insights into how the mind works encouraged writers to break away from this. In modernist literature, time is experienced subjectively, just like it is in our own lives. In Proust's work, for example, memories can leap out at us from the past, shaping the present in ways that defy any straightforward timeline. The subjective experience of time becomes central, with memories, emotions, and thoughts constantly shifting our understanding of reality. Have you ever felt disconnected from society, from the people around you, or even from yourself? This profound sense of alienation lies at the core of modernist literature. In the wake of industrialization, urbanization, and the devastation of World War I, the world was changing rapidly, and with it, individuals felt increasingly adrift. The traditional values and structures that once anchored society seemed to crumble, leaving people isolated, both socially and existentially. But what does it mean to be alienated in this way? And how did modernist writers reflect this sense of estrangement in their works? Frederick Jameson, a prominent philosopher and critic, captures this dual sense of alienation, explaining that it is both a metaphysical and social phenomenon. In his words, modernist alienation reflects not only a metaphysical estrangement from the self, but also the material alienation of individuals from the rapidly changing socioeconomic systems of industrial capitalism. Think about it. Alienation is not just feeling emotionally disconnected from the world, but also feeling lost in the relentless impersonal machine of modern society. It's no wonder that many modernist writers were obsessed with exploring this theme. They sought to understand how individuals could navigate a world that seemed to have lost its sense of meaning and coherence. One of the most striking examples of alienation in modernist literature is Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. Picture this. A man wakes up one morning to find he has turned into a giant insect. Sounds bizarre, right? But the real horror of Gregor Samsa's transformation isn't just the physical change. It's the isolation that comes with it. Suddenly, Gregor, who had once been the breadwinner for his family, is cut off from them entirely. His family, once dependent on him, turns against him, and he becomes a burden, a creature to be shunned. It's as though his humanity is stripped away, leaving him a mere shell, both literally and figuratively. Isn't that a powerful metaphor for how many people felt in the rapidly changing world of the 20th century? Walter Sokol, a literary historian, notes that Kafka's The Metamorphosis is a deep exploration of modern alienation, where Gregor's transformation is a metaphor for the dehumanizing effects of modern society. Imagine being reduced to nothing more than an object, a cog in a machine, as Sokol explains. Kafka's portrayal of Gregor's physical metamorphosis serves as a metaphor for the dehumanizing effects of modern society, where individuals are reduced to mere objects within a machine-like social structure. Gregor isn't just alienated from his family, he's alienated from himself, no longer recognizing the person he once was. His sense of identity disintegrates, mirroring the way many modern individuals felt as they faced the harsh, mechanized reality of industrial capitalism. Now let's turn to T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. In this haunting poem, we step into the mind of J. Alfred Prufrock, a man paralyzed by his overwhelming sense of alienation. Have you ever hesitated, afraid to take action, consumed by self-doubt? Prufrock's inner monologue reveals a man who feels completely disconnected from the world around him. He's unsure of himself, terrified of judgment, and feels unable to participate in the social rituals that define his society. His indecision and anxiety lead to a kind of paralysis, trapping him in a cycle of endless contemplation without action. Literary critic Grover Smith captures this internal struggle well, describing Prufrock as a character who embodies the deep sense of alienation and uncertainty characteristic of modernism. Prufrock's isolation is not only social but also existential, as he feels disconnected from any larger purpose or meaning in life. Prufrock longs to connect with others, but his fear of rejection and misunderstanding keeps him trapped in his own mind, creating a poignant portrayal of modernist alienation. As we listen to his thoughts, we can almost feel the weight of his isolation, the crushing sense of being unable to break free from his own insecurities. But where does this concept of alienation come from? To fully understand it, we need to look at Karl Marx's theories of alienation in the capitalist system. According to Marx, workers in a capitalist society are alienated not only from the products of their labor, but also from themselves and their fellow human beings. Imagine spending every day producing something, yet feeling no connection to the outcome of your work, and being treated as just another cog in the machine. This is the alienation Marx described. He argued that capitalism dehumanizes workers, reducing them to commodities, much like the products they create. This idea had a profound impact on many modernist writers, who were deeply concerned with how the rise of industrial capitalism was affecting individuals. As mentioned, Frederick Jameson extends this analysis, arguing that modernist alienation is not just about feeling metaphysically disconnected from oneself, but also about the very real social and economic alienation caused by capitalism. This theme is powerfully illustrated in Kafka's The Metamorphosis, where Gregor's transformation into an insect symbolizes the dehumanizing effects of a capitalist society that reduces individuals to mere functions. Similarly, in Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, we see the existential crisis faced by a man in a world where traditional social structures have broken down, leaving him to navigate a fragmented, uncertain reality on his own. Imagine living in a world where everything you once believed in, social structures, moral values, even the way stories are told, starts to crumble around you. How would you express that confusion, that disillusionment? Welcome to the heart of modernism. This literary movement didn't just tweak the conventions of the past, it blew them up. Modernist writers wanted to capture the complexity of the modern experience in ways realism simply couldn't. Where realism sought to paint a detailed, objective picture of society, modernism plunged into the fragmented, subjective realities of a world in flux. But why such a radical shift? What was it about the early 20th century that made the old ways of storytelling feel insufficient? Malcolm Bradbury describes modernism as a radical break from the traditions of realism, where the coherence of reality gives way to the disjointed, subjective experience of a fragmented world. Think about that for a moment. In a world torn apart by war, industrialization, and moral uncertainty, does life still feel like a neat, linear narrative? Or is it more like a chaotic jumble of impressions and experiences? Let's rewind a bit. In the 19th century, realism and naturalism were the dominant literary movements. Writers like Gustave Flaubert and Émile Zola focused on depicting the world with scientific precision. Realism was their window into society, and they wanted that window to be crystal clear. Think of Flaubert's Madame Bovary, or Zola's Thérèse Raquin, works that meticulously depicted social realities with an almost clinical objectivity. Realism was all about structure, cause and effect, and capturing life as it is. But was that enough for the chaotic, rapidly shifting realities of the 20th century? Modernists didn't think so. They felt that realism, with its orderly worldviews, couldn't capture the whirlwind of emotions, doubts, and contradictions that defined modern life. Virginia Woolf, one of modernism's leading voices, boldly critiqued this in her essay Modern Fiction from 1925. She asked, "How can you describe life as a series of neatly arranged events when human experience is anything but neat?" In her words, life is not a series of gig lamps symmetrically arranged. Life is a luminous halo, a semi-transparent envelope surrounding us from the beginning of consciousness to the end. What a vivid image! Life is not a clean, linear path. It's a swirl of thoughts, emotions, and impressions, always shifting, always subjective. Can we truly understand the modern experience without embracing that uncertainty? Modernist writers didn't just reject realism. They redefined the very structure of storytelling. They threw out the chronological, coherent narratives of the past and replaced them with fragmented, circular, and often disorienting forms. Why? Because they believed that this better reflected the way people actually experience time, memory, and reality. Just think of how memories drift in and out of focus, or how our thoughts often leap from one idea to the next without a clear path. Isn't that closer to the way we live our lives? Take William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury, 1929, for instance. This novel shatters the traditional narrative structure by presenting events through multiple characters' fragmented perspectives, including the mentally impaired Benji. His mind doesn't process time in a linear fashion, and Faulkner deliberately mirrors this in the novel's disjointed timeline. It's confusing, yes, but isn't that the point? As critic Clent Brooks explains, Faulkner's nonlinear narrative is a radical departure from realism, reflecting the fragmented nature of human consciousness and the disintegration of traditional social values. But Faulkner wasn't alone in this experiment. James Joyce and Virginia Woolf introduced the stream of consciousness technique in works like Ulysses, 1922, and Mrs. Dalloway, 1925. This style immerses us directly into characters' minds, capturing their internal thoughts as they flit from one association to the next. It's chaotic, yes, but isn't human thought chaotic? Joyce and Woolf wanted us to experience that mental chaos firsthand. This was a stark contrast to the logical, linear thought processes depicted in realist literature. Now, let's zoom out and consider the bigger picture. Beyond their formal experiments, modernist writers were also grappling with a world where traditional values and social hierarchies were disintegrating. Industrialization, capitalism, and the horrors of war had shattered the old moral certainties. How could anyone still believe in the ideals of the past when the world had become so unpredictable and violent? Consider Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, 1899. This haunting novella confronts the dark realities of European colonialism. As Marlowe ventures deeper into Africa, he discovers that the so-called civilizing mission of the West is a facade, masking a brutal, greedy exploitation of other cultures. Kurtz, the enigmatic figure at the heart of the story, symbolizes the collapse of Western morality. Ian Watt captures it perfectly. Heart of Darkness is a critique of the moral assumptions underlying imperialism, revealing the hollowness of the civilizing mission and the darkness at the heart of human nature. It's a grim portrayal of a world where traditional values have crumbled, leaving only chaos and moral ambiguity in their wake. And if there was any doubt about the collapse of those values, World War I obliterated them. This war wasn't just a global conflict. It was a profound existential crisis. How could the ideals of progress, reason, and morality survive after such senseless carnage? As literary historian Paul Fussell notes, the war shattered the Enlightenment faith in reason and progress, leaving modernist writers to grapple with a world in which certainty had been replaced by doubt and order by chaos. Modernist literature reflected this shattered world, offering stories of broken characters struggling to make sense of the fragments of their lives. Modernism represents a significant break from the literary traditions of the 19th century, particularly realism and naturalism. While these earlier movements sought to depict reality with scientific precision and objectivity, modernists shifted their focus toward subjectivity, fragmentation, and inner experiences. Through their experimentation with form and content, evident in the works of authors like Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, and William Faulkner, modernists challenged the established frameworks of narrative structure, as well as the conventional representations of time, space, and identity. Modernist literature often reflects a world in which traditional moral and social structures are disintegrating, mirroring the profound crises that characterize modern society. This thematic exploration of dislocation and alienation resonates deeply with the experiences of individuals in a rapidly changing environment. The influence of philosophical and psychological developments during this period, especially Friedrich Nietzsche's existential philosophy and Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis, played a crucial role in shaping modernist literature. These influences will be our focal points in the next two lessons, as we examine how they informed the modernist response to the complexities of human existence. Through their innovative techniques and thematic concerns, modernist writers sought to capture the fragmented and often chaotic nature of modern life, redefining the boundaries of literature in the process.